Very nice. Okay. Good to know.
Where?
Okay. Welcome.
Afternoon, I guess now.
All right, we are live to YouTube. And I'm just gonna check on my end that everyone can hear us. Okay, we're good.
Yay.
Okay.
Yep.
Welcome, everyone, to Historic Sites Board meeting. And I'm chairing until we do elections for the chair and vice chair. The meeting today of March 8th. We are live streamed on the city YouTube. And also we'd like to acknowledge with respect that we are meeting on Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, known as Balating. Balating is the home of Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. So our second item on our agenda is a presentation by the Clerk's Department, and we have a guest here today, Rachel and Madison, who are city clerk and assistant city deputy. So, welcome, and this is to give us direction and advice on the procedural bylaws of our meeting. The Historic Sites Board is a word of council.
So I'm just gonna share a screen here so that everyone here and everyone viewing can see it. And then we'll get started in just a second.
We've been doing this since January 2023, so we've been visiting everybody. You might be our last stop.
Best for last.
There you go.
So,
Now, each board member has a binder with a copy.
okay, perfect. So again, I'm Madison Duke, I'm the deputy city clerk, and this is our city clerk, Rachel. We come and I think she said, right, this is our last, maybe one of our last, I don't want to say last for sure, because there might be another, but we've gone through this presentation several times. And if you have any questions in between, feel free to just throw up your hand or ask or whatever. We're here to help. And if we don't have the answer today, we can certainly go back and find an answer in the back. So just a fluid presentation. You don't have to wait to the end to ask. And we'll go through each slide and kind of check in with everybody as we go. So I'm just going to check. I'm going to let you start, Rachel, just so I can check the YouTube and see what we're seeing there.
Okay. So local boards and committees of council include advisory and other committees or boards whose members are appointed by council for an ongoing purpose, as well as special committees appointed by council or the head of council from time to time. So our ad hoc committees for a specific purpose.
The only thing I'll make note of here is we did get a new board manager application process. You would have seen a change from previous years when you apply to be part of boards and committees. We are working through that. There were some bumps in the road, just kind of getting used to the system, but hopefully by the next round we'll have all the kinks worked out. So we appreciate everyone's patience with that and appreciate everyone applying for that new tool and
your patience for sure.
Patience for sure. We appreciate that.
So when we talk about governance versus management, we talk about council, or we'll insert the board in there, provides governance, oversight, planning, so sort of big picture, where operations are the responsibility of staff. And staff will, when we talk about city staff bringing operational plans, strategies, budget, and so on that aligns with the corporate strategic plan that council has established. So our boards in their advisory capacities will make recommendations for council's consideration or approval. Can you
Yeah, I'm just making sure.
So, we're gonna talk about the accountability and transparency requirements, and that includes municipal act, municipal conflict of interest, the city's procedure bylaw that all our boards and committees, are subject to, as well as the code of conduct for members of council and boards and committees.
I'm not sure. I'm just want to double check that we're live because there's,
Do you think there's a lag?
it's just showing our first slide. So I just want to make sure we're. Oh, they're not seeing the slides. They're just let me see here.
As well as.
My apologies, they can hear us, but the slide deck was not sharing properly. So let's try that again. Sorry. Well, I know there was some technical difficulty the last time, so I just want to make sure that we're ensuring everyone at home can see what we're doing. Okay, so here is our board and committee slide. I don't like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do this. We'll just do it this way and see if they can see it that way.
There's always a solution. Just find another way, right?
Okay,
You good?
so yes, it looks a little, it's not the way we usually present it, but it'll do. But there's our board and committee slide. The governance versus management slide. Accountability and transparency slide.
And procedure bylaw will
And
be our-
procedure bylaw, so. Sorry about that, folks that are watching on YouTube. And would you like me to jump in? Okay, so our procedure bylaw 2022-100 is the council's procedure bylaw applies to the calling and proceedings of meetings of council and of local boards and committees. So a committee is defined as any advisory or other committee, subcommittee, or similar entity of which at least 50% of the members are also members of one or more councils or local boards. So we have a note to say here that subcommittees are included in this definition. So if you do end up having any subcommittees that result out of this committee, the same rules and procedure would apply. Local board does not include police services boards or the public library boards as they're under separate legislation. The definition of a meeting. So a meeting means any regular, special, or other meeting of a council, of a local board, or of a committee of either of them where a quorum of members is present and where members discuss or otherwise deal with any matter in a way that materially advances the business or decision-making of the council, local board, or committee. So we say this because you might be at, and my understanding is there may be events where the board volunteers and helps, and you're all present, you have a quorum of the board, just don't materially advance the business of the committee at the events. Otherwise, you're in an improperly closed meeting. So there are times where you may be all together, and that's okay, but just don't talk business. Just focus on the event. So those two elements need to be fulfilled. I noticed we were only stuck on the first slide at home.
Oh, okay.
So I changed the formatting a little bit.
Okay.
Madison,
Yes,
question.
sure.
So how about emails?
Yes, that's absolutely, yeah. Group email discussions constitute a meeting. So if you're emailing everybody on the board and it is furthering the business of the board or committee, that constitutes a meeting, and the public can't see those emails, right? That interaction, that live decision making. So don't do that. Don't do group emails to the entire group that it materially advances the business of the board or committee.
Madison?
Yes.
So for example, let's say some of us came up with a really good idea. And we said, hey, here's an idea, and send it to the whole group and say, can we talk about this at the next meeting?
What I would suggest is email the chair and the staff liaison and put it on the agenda for the next meeting to discuss rather than circulating it to the entire group.
Okay. What if it's information sharing as a result of a meeting that they went to? So I know that they go to a conference and they promised the board that they would share additional information on email, and they do that.
Put it on the agenda.
Yeah, I would say that.
The other problem with that, like, even if you were just like, Merry Christmas, everybody, it's inviting that temptation to reply all and start a string. It's gonna take you down a path that you ought not be on, right?
So noted, don't be nice.
Don't reply all.
And it's a big thing that, because when the public review the agenda, those conversations, that information is not available to them. So that's the critical point, is that needs to be available to the public so they know what you're discussing at the next meeting, and having that decision making, being able to view the decision making in real time, right? So the agenda is set by the chair in consultation with the staff resource, and you'll have a chair shortly after our presentation to work with Kathy on building the agenda. We ask that the agenda be posted at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. A week is ideal, or as soon as you have it. We'd like to get it up as quickly as we can, but that includes all attachments that the board and committee are privy to as well. You want to make sure all the information that you're going to be receiving for an open meeting is also available to members of the public. And the business considered in order set forth on the agenda, but if it makes more sense to vary that throughout the meeting, the chair can move those agenda items as it makes sense. And a member may ask that a motion is placed on the agenda provided they have a second.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
So if at the last minute we wanted to pass the resolution, how does that?
Can you give
Do you mean a resolution from the floor, Kathy?
Yeah, like if we're in discussion about something and it's. They decide, the group that Historic Site Board decides we should probably pass a resolution on this, can that be?
That can come from the floor, as long as it's tied to something on the agenda.
Okay,
And it still needs a mover and seconder and a
Yes.
proper vote and all of that.
okay.
Well, because you're moving, I was a staff liaison for many years on a committee. And we would be talking about something and then the committee member would say, oh, we want to action that. So they would get someone to move and second that action be taken on that agenda item, and everyone would vote on it properly. But yeah, that's not a problem.
Mostly the reason, because we talk about a notice of motion in a slide or two. For this one, what we're saying is if you had a member to move something and seconded a motion, then it goes on the agenda because you've got a mover and a seconder, and then it can come before the group on the agenda.
So open meetings shall be open to the public and no person shall be excluded therefrom except for improper conduct. So the chair will manage the conduct. Notice of meetings is published on the city website, including agenda and minutes. Public may record by video or audio. So we do live stream now, so that recording is available to the public on our YouTube page. But also if someone were to attend the meeting in person, they have a recording device and they just set it right here. That's also permitted. Subcommittees we talked about this, are subject to the procedure bylaw and open meeting provisions. The big thing is you just don't want to have anything that you're talking about at the meeting that's outside of the agenda you posted on the public website, right? That's
Transparency.
Yeah, for transparency. Over to you. Our very tiny text slide.
We're always embarrassed about the slide
On
because
the last one.
it breaks all
At the
rules.
end of the last one, you mentioned subcommittees. So for the sake of the Historic Sites Board, we used to have subcommittees. We don't anymore. We might have a little task force with one or two board members joining staff to do some, like, for example, we had one on the maintenance, capital asset management. And they do walk around the buildings, do all of that, and then that committee would return to the board at the next meeting. or
It's a
whatever.
task force though, not a
Yeah,
committee.
so now we don't, yeah, it's just usually anyone that's interested from the district, they can join a staff and do the walk. So we don't.
Just remember when you do your task forces, because task forces, so you've got more staff than members, you're not subject to the open meeting provisions and procedure bylaw. But what we recommend is that the board pass a motion that appoints these individuals to the task force so that we have it papered as to who the members of that task force.
Including the listing of the staff members on that task force as well. The titles
Yeah.
of their positions.
Titles, not
Yeah,
names.
titles not names, so that can change over time. And our teeny tiny text slide.
And the reason that it's such a bad slide is because what we've done is taken the whole section of the municipal act that sets out the reasons you can be enclosed and just pasted it all in there. So I don't know how often this board would find the need to go into closed session. But these are the statutory reasons that you are permitted to go into closed session. So things like security of property, personal matters about an identifiable individual. I wouldn't imagine you'd be doing labor relations or employee negotiations or litigation. You might be doing things where you've got something to discuss that might be a trade secret or something like that, that would adversely impact the person who's giving you the information by making it public, those kinds of things. We are available and happy to give you advice if you've got something that you're like, we'd like to discuss it in closed, but can we? We always say just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that you're permitted to go into closed. But happy to be a resource for you on that. We also point out that the section is permissive, not prescriptive. So while the act will allow you to go into closed for those sessions, it doesn't mean you have to. So if you don't see any damage in it being discussed publicly, you can do that. There should be a motion passed in your open session that says the reason that you're going into closed.
Yes, there's been some investigations of other municipalities throughout COVID. I think that when it was a bit of a learning curve where they didn't pass the closed motion in open. So they had to live stream the passing of that motion and then they would shut the live stream off and go into the closed meeting. So if that comes up, give me a call.
Yeah.
And
There-
it'll be on the agenda at the next.
There are exceptions to the open meeting provisions. So a meeting of a council or a board can be closed to the public for education or training, as long as there's that caveat again that you're not doing anything to advance the business of the board or committee. We generally still, even though we could be enclosed for education and training, we'd like to leave it open and then people know what you're being trained on or being discussed. Yeah. Yeah.
Sharing knowledge, right?
I mean, I think that for specific things that, you know, might be legal, that kind of thing. Occasionally we'll go into closed for training on those things. Generally speaking, we keep it open as much as we can.
So electronic meetings, I always have a little story to tell for electronic meetings. I started in the clerk's office in 2019. And in March of 2020, the pandemic came. So it was something very new to me as well, just meetings in general, but then we were moving to electronic meeting platforms. And we started off, we had the Shaw filming a telephone call at one point in time where we were having, teleconference meetings. The Municipal Act did change to allow for participants to be able to vote electronically. So if they're participating electronically, they would be counted as part of quorum. Where before that didn't happen. You could participate electronically, but you wouldn't be counted as part of quorum. So that is still standing today. They haven't reverted back to the old rules. So we're still continuing on, and we actually think the electronic meetings is good for a number of reasons. But one, if you can't make a meeting because you're not feeling that well and you don't want to come to the meeting, and get everyone else sick, you can participate remotely. Or if you're out of town and you still want to attend the meeting, and it allows for greater flexibility. We do encourage people to come to meetings because there is an element of being together, but at the same time, that option is available to people. But it also provides for greater transparency and accountability and greater observation by the public. So people are watching, like people are getting more engaged. And we think that that's a really good thing for the members of the public to be able to see what's happening, see what's, discussed, see what decisions are being made. And it allows for greater accountability and transparency. So we have the link to the YouTube channel. It's right on the city's webpage. It's embedded in most of our eScribe agenda templates. And what we found over the course of the pandemic and through investigations done by the ombudsman's office, if the live stream is lost, you want to adjourn the meeting. So there's been times where it was, I forget the exact municipality, but there was a municipality that lost their live stream
And
and kept the meeting rolling, and they were found to be improperly closed, and we learned from that, right? So it's a learning as well. Like, I know investigations sound kind of like, oh, you know, bad and uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's a learning process for us too, that we can learn from the best practices of other municipalities, and we can learn from our own best practices as we move forward, right? Because we have had some recent investigations of our own, and we've learned really quickly, and we shifted focus really quickly and implemented those changes really quickly. And it's been a good learning process for us, but they do happen. They do happen, and we're trying to try to avoid them as much as we can. So
that takes us to those meeting investigations. So the municipal act provides that a person can request an investigation from the ombudsman as to whether council or a board met improperly and closed. The ombudsman will investigate, provide and publish a report, and make recommendations if they feel that the meeting was improperly closed. And then the council passes a resolution as to how it intends to address the report. And we had two of them recently for two separate committees. Actually, from November of 2021, those meetings happened. And I think it was just in January that council passed the motion that addressed the ombudsman's report that had come a month earlier as to how I intended to proceed. And I think on both of them, it was this publishing the link so that everybody can access it, as opposed to having, I think what they had was a Zoom link, and where like you can contact us to register if you want to watch it. And the ombudsman's office said that's not sufficient. It needs to be open so that anybody can go and watch it without having to go through that step. And what that was an interesting thing we learned through that was that the report came to council. I was expecting the ombudsman report to go to the committee, for the committee then to say, you know, we are going to comply with what the ombudsman suggested, but it came to council and then going down to the committee.
and as soon as we became aware, we course corrected right away anyways. It wasn't like we waited till January of this year, like we made some adjustments to that right away.
That week. in
That
fact.
week, yes.
November 2021.
So the rules of conduct and debate, the chair presides, the board and committee meetings are held in committee of the whole. So you might see a council meeting where it's like through you, mayor, to councilor, so and so. Though in a committee of a whole meeting, it's a bit more relaxed. The number of times you can respond to an agenda item, the amount of time you speak are a little bit more relaxed, but the chair still needs to keep things flowing and, you know, make sure that they still run the meeting in an effective and efficient manner. However, it's not as procedurally strict as a meeting. So. In the conduct of members, a member shall not disobey the provisions of this bylaw or decision of the chair on questions of order or practice or upon the interpretation of the rules of procedure or breach parliamentary decorum. So we let the chair manage the decorum of the. We do have, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but we will circulate the code of conduct to the group as well, so that you kind of have an understanding of some of those rules as well.
So motions should be in writing, and you'll often have a long preface as to whereas the city of Sault Ste. Marie is a beautiful place, and whereas we want to encourage culture, you know, but the operative is the resolve of that. So that's the action that you want the board to consider. And when we were talking before about moving and seconding, so if you want to introduce something that's of a substantive nature after your agenda's been published, you do it by notice of motion. So it would appear on the agenda as a notice of motion moved by whatever member. When you get a seconder, that would appear on the following. It's monthly, right, Virginie?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would appear.
Right now.
As of now.
And the idea behind that is that everybody in the public knows what you're going to discuss, so nobody's bringing something up substantive at your meeting that the public hasn't been aware of.
So the finality of the vote, subject to a motion to reconsider, a motion once decided may not be reintroduced for 12 months. And this is so if there's a member that it didn't go their way, they can't just keep reintroducing it meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting to try to get a different outcome. However, a motion to reconsider is an option, but it must be moved by a member who voted with the prevailing side and seconded either by a member who voted with the prevailing side or a member who is absent. So what that means is if you have a vote and something was defeated, someone who voted against it could put a motion to reconsider, and a seconder would have to be either also someone who voted against it or someone who was absent from the meeting to have that discussion brought back to the committee for reconsideration. So there's some specific rules, but if that ends up coming up, you can always reach out to us and miss this. So. Relevance of debate on all motions, discussion must be relevant to the subject under consideration, both in open.
There's a reason it has
Yeah.
to stop all by itself, right?
And we've talked a little bit about it. It's both for open and closed. What can happen is people start talking about things and then all of a sudden an idea pops in your head, to your point, where you're kind of, idea pops in your head and you start talking about something else. It's up to the chair to say, hey, that wasn't an agenda item. Let's table it for the next meeting. Or in closed, you don't want to start veering off onto other topics and you're in closed for a specific purpose. So it's really, really important because in an open meeting, you want to make sure the public has all the information. And if it wasn't meant to be discussed, then members of the public who wanted to hear about that wouldn't have had the opportunity to know that you're going to discuss that this meeting, right? So the relevance is very important.
So for quorum, the mayor is an ex officio member of all committees, but isn't counted in quorum. No business is to be considered unless a quorum is present. Quorum is a majority. If you were to lose it during the meeting, then your meeting's over. When we talk about the municipal conflict of interest document, a few slides, we'll talk about this. You don't lose quorum as a result of people declaring pecuniary interest.
So administration wise, the secretary shall keep the minutes and record without note or comment. So just the action items or the decision points of the group. Provide notice of the meetings, post minutes to post minutes and agenda to the website or forward to the communications team and we'll get them up on the website. Perform clerical functions as required. The chair of the committee votes. It's a common myth, that the chair only votes in the event of a tie. That's not accurate. The chair votes. If you want to call a recorded vote, that's where you're going through and actually recording in the minutes how everyone voted, how each member voted. And there's no abstentions. So if you're not in the room, obviously you're absent, but if you're in the room, you have to vote. You can't abstain from a vote. If you don't vote, it's considered in the negative. Tied vote is defeated. So how many members do you have on your committee? 8. So there can be times where you might have
4 and 4,
4 and 4, you're defeated.
So in addition to being the closed meeting investigator, the ombudsman can review complaints about administrative actions and decisions of municipalities. So what they'll do is say, what is your policy about somebody's complaint? What's your policy about this? Did you follow policy in dealing with this person? They're not judging whether your policy is appropriate or not so much as did you have a policy in place and did you follow it? However, the ombudsman cannot overturn decisions of the board or of council or direct them on public policy, but they do have a role if people wish to complain about the way a matter was handled and whether policy was followed.
So the integrity commissioner, they investigate the application of the code of conduct. And Kathy did note to me that in your binders, a copy of the code of conduct is also already available. So you'll find that under one of the tabs right in the middle. It is
Right after this presentation.
Yes. We are doing a review of the code of conduct. So once we update that, we'll provide you with new copies of the revised code of conduct. And it's the application of code of conduct by members of council and the local boards and committees. application of any procedure, rules, and policies governing ethical behavior, application of conflicts of interest to members of council and local boards and committees, and requests from members for advice regarding obligations under code of conduct, procedures, rules, policies, or the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and provision of education information regarding these above items. So the Ombudsman's office is a closed meeting, and kind of the administrative policy investigator, the integrity commissioner, is related to conflict of interest and code of conduct. Code of conduct. So the Municipal Act requires that a code of conduct be established for municipal councils, advisory committees, and local boards. It covers gifts and benefits, confidentiality, use of board property, influence on staff, or improper use of influence. And again, these complaints alleging violations are investigated by the integrity commissioner. The results of the inquiry are reported to both council and the local board. So there is a web page on our website that discusses the code of conduct, the investigation process. There's a whole document that outlines it. And if you have any questions about that, you can just send that.
The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So if a member has any pecuniary or financial interest, whether it's direct or indirect, in a matter of the meeting, they should disclose that before the meeting. There's a requirement for a written disclosure, and you've got forms that your members would fill out if they have a financial interest. You're not to take part in any of the discussion on that matter, and not to vote on it. You're also not to attempt to influence the other members. And that interest extends to the interest of family members as well.
I just asked for the forms.
If the meeting's closed, the member must leave the room. So in an open meeting, the member with the conflict can stay and just not participate in the discussion. Often, they choose to leave the room in any event. It's not mandatory, except if it were in closed session. If you're absent from a meeting at which a matter is considered that you had a conflict on, you should declare it at the next meeting. The disclosure is recorded in the minutes. And when we talked about quorum earlier, we said quorum is deemed to not have, is still deemed to be constituted if it's lost as a result of.
Unless it's less than 2.
Because that would be hard.
Yeah.
What's the logic behind that? You're not at a meeting, but you still have to say you declare at the next meeting.
For transparency, to be that you weren't,
Because the minutes would say you're absent from the meeting, therefore you're not voting at that meeting. So it just seems kind of strange.
it's sort of a, if we can put transparency in bold,
Yeah.
right? That I did have an interest in it, and the subtext of that is, and I didn't participate, and I didn't talk to anybody about it to attempt them to influence. In the,
Even though you're not physically there.
right,
Absent from the
because
meeting.
you wouldn't want to have the perception that, well, I saw it on the agenda, I talked to everybody,
Oh,
right?
okay.
No, I
Okay,
didn't vote.
fair enough.
Sorry, if I can just ask, go back to that slide again. So the person leaves that declares a conflict of interest, are they part of quorum? Sorry, I didn't.
You don't lose quorum, so if you've got quorum and then 4 people, have left.
Yeah.
You haven't lost quorum because of the declarations, yeah. So an indirect pecuniary interest is if the member's a shareholder, a controlling interest or a senior officer of a corporation, member of a body that has a financial interest in the matter, or a partner or so on. So that's to capture that it's not John Smith personally, it was John Smith Incorporated. No, that's an indirect financial interest and you still need to declare it.
Can I use me as an example for this? Just because I really actually don't know. So the last bullet here, or in the employment of a person or body. So I work for the government. The ministry also has oversight over NHSC funding that are nominated for the city and municipality, but I declare an interest on any decision, even though I do not have any authority or approval rights on that funding program.
So it is the incumbent on the member as to how the member perceives it.
Right.
The integrity commissioner is there to answer questions if you're having difficulty with that. most people would for optics, even though there's not a direct financial. Yeah, and I think, is it my next slide that has the questions that? Because I find it, those 3 slides, just a bunch of words that, you know, what ifs. So we did sort of a quick little, do I have a financial interest, positive or negative? Does it directly affect my finances or those of my parent, spouse, or child? So is it indirect? Am I a shareholder, corporate officer, member of a body, partner, or employee? And
Say yes.
I would. I would.
Yes, okay.
But that you bring up a good point in that another member doesn't get to say that to you. It's your decision.
Right.
So if the answer to those questions is yes, and you're not subject to the exemptions, you would declare a conflict in writing, Kathy will have the forms, and you're not to attempt to influence voting. Yeah,
Here are
the
the
exceptions, the exceptions are if you have an interest, which is in common with electors generally, then like everybody has an interest in this decision. So yours is not an individual interest that you need to declare. Or that it's so insignificant or remote that it would be not reasonable to regard it as something to influence. We like to use the example of, I'll buy you a coffee. The chicken sandwich from Big Lake Cabin, that counts.
So Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act is another piece of legislation that governs, we're governed under, is to protect the privacy of individuals, to provide for the disclosure of certain records upon request of the Freedom of Information request. Best practice to release documents which are already publicly available, so agendas, minutes, council reports, those types of things. And the communications regarding the business of the municipality are considered a record regardless of whether the device is a personal or physically or not. So there was this notion that if I use my personal cell phone and text Kathy about the historic sites boards and advance the business, that it doesn't count because it's on my personal device. That's not accurate. If it's about city business, even if it's on my personal device, it's still considered a corporate record. So we're making sure people are mindful of that and
For your texts or your emails, bear in mind that there is always the potential that they could be released under a Freedom of Information request. So some things are better discussed on the telephone or whatever, that we just that'll caveat is if you want to see, do you want to see it published in a newspaper or on Instagram, I guess, in this stage.
Any social media.
At all.
Yeah.
We talk about boards and committees being subordinate and accountable to city council, and that statements critical of city council or its members are not appropriate. That's mostly with respect to surveys. You'll find we've got the odd slide in our deck that's there because we ran it. What problem? And we did have a committee that was sending out surveys that were from the point of view that they didn't like a decision council had made. And it's, for one thing, that's going to skew your survey results. So that's not a good survey to start with. But given that the committee is accountable to council, they really shouldn't be leading out with, we don't like what council said and inviting input that way.
And that's not to say though that the committee or board can't garner input. It's not always going to be positive, right? Like we're not suggesting that the discussions are always, in that manner, but it's to lead out the surveys. It's not necessarily meant to be, well, if we're going to go and do a survey and it's a neutral survey, but we get negative feedback, we can't talk about it. That's not accurate. You want to be able to garner.
And we
input.
shared that actually budget input was a good example of that. Because all of the input that we received went onto the council agenda. And the only things we'll redact are profanity or, you'll get people who submit something that they talk about a specific employee or a specific member of council. We redact that, but we don't redact the negative. It's important to hear that whole picture. Yeah.
But the survey itself went out as sort of a neutral survey, so. And that's all for the formal presentation. we know it's a lot. Oh, I'm like, I'm sorry to the YouTube, I've got my back to you. But it's a lot of information, and it's your first meeting. If you're not already, if you haven't been on a board or committee, we don't want to overwhelm people. We know that it's a lot of information, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Kathy's been involved in boards and committees a long time. We have conversations back and forth. We're gonna, we're emailing back and forth this week about some matters, just procedural questions or things like that. She'll reach out to us and we can work through those if you have any questions that you didn't think of today, or things
Like
that
the
come up, like the form. Yeah, we can get those disclosure forms, so no problem. And we're here to be a resource. So, but it's a lot of fun being on part of boards and committees. We don't want to feel like people are overwhelmed and like, oh, what did I get myself into? It's just to make sure that we do things in an accountable and transparent way. And I just like to end on that note, because I know sometimes it's a lot of information. So, but we're happy, we do this stuff every day and happy to help.
Question. May not be under this umbrella, but what happens if one of us receives an email from a person in the city or wherever, and they had a concern about, not that this would happen, but the management operations or something to do with the historical site? Should we take upon ourselves to say thank you for your concern, and it's more part of procedure than automatically send it to Kathy, or this is probably not in your umbrella,
Well, I think as for yourself individually as a member of council, there's a different dynamic
Right.
with constituents.
But
if
I put
it's
my other
related-
hat on.
Yeah, I think if it's not a counselor related inquiry, I mean, certainly. My first inclination would be to forward it to staff for review, and if it's supposed to go, if we wanted to have it on the agenda to discuss, then that correspondence could be added to a historic site board agenda. Like we have a correspondence agenda where if there's information that comes through the clerk's office that's meant to be circulated to city council, we put it on the correspondence agenda. Obviously, we look at the information, make sure it's properly redacted, if there's personal identifiable stuff and that kind of thing. But I would suggest, I mean, you can always reach out to us to discuss. But the board member information is not, like your individual personal information is not on the city's website. So I would direct it to staff. I don't know if you would be in agreement with that, Rachel, but, and then that way we can vet it and research it and properly address it and put it on the agenda if it's warranted, yeah.
I'm just curious, like, if I'm not putting my counselor's hat on, I'm putting a board member's hat on, and if we received a letter individually, to us, like, would Kathy want us to try to reply to it, or just automatically send it to you and the chair?
I think it's generally wise to keep staff in a loop on it, so that what's out there, and if they're recurring, then it's something that you might, in consultation with your chair, be like, oh, we're getting a lot of questions about this, so perhaps we can do a report on our agenda that addresses that issue.
You're in a tough position, because you are wearing several hats. So that's storming in my head, because you have that situation where you have people with several hats, and you gotta differentiate the role. And that's a tough one.
And again, I'm right, this question, Meg, and ask the question properly, because pretend I'm just, Kelly, right? And like, I'm getting all these emails from someone saying, well, it seems like the historical site is not doing this, and sometimes you feel obligated that you want to give your own opinion, say, no, that's not true, I think we're doing a great job, blah, 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 right?
Yeah,
And so just to protect, Kelly, what's our procedure here for the board? Again, not wearing my counselor, I'm pretend I'm Kelly, I'm just picking on you, for example. But there could be some, circumstances where you're going to have a person out in that world, for some reason might be upset with what we're doing. And instead of bringing you down the rabbit hole, what's the proper procedure? And you're such a good person, you might want to start, answering them and get further down.
Sure,
the
you
rabbit
can do
hole.
that. You can do that, especially when you're intimately involved and the answers,
Yeah.
similar to a member of council, right? Well, we talked about that, and you might want to look at this agenda,
Yeah,
so on and so forth. I would always copy staff resource,
okay.
because that's the point of contact that sort of has the bird's eye view as to what discussions are going on out there.
Also, if it's related to the terms of reference, it might be outside of the scope of this committee and board too, right? So if you get a question that's not within the terms of reference and the scope of this board, that also is a factor to consider.
And again,
We get lots of inquiries.
yeah,
You know, the fence is in desperate need of repair. Why haven't you fixed this or that? So just get along.
and I think that's good information for everyone,
Yeah.
especially the new people that may not have been on our committee before. Because you're out there in the public, so they may reach out to you.
And I think Kathy has the historical context on things that may be from boards of like
Yeah.
previous board terms, right? That you might have that historical context on, oh, we've dealt with this in the past, but these people just don't know that, or the new board members might not be aware of an issue that came up in, 1992 or whatever, but we have the city records to show. We can go back and do a historical search on and just try to provide some insight and answers on things that might have come up. So I think that's a good point as well. Thanks, it was great, yeah, it was very engaging.
Don't
More
hesitate to
questions.
reach out, yeah.
More questions, I think that
Thank you.
Here to help.
Thank you. Thank you.
absolutely,
When you get out in the hall, check to make sure we have sound and.
yes, I will.
I don't like touching the computer.
Everything's okay.
After gone through all this, and you lose it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, if she runs back in, we lost sound or we have to adjourn.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Now that we know the rules.
Well, and they change over time too, so if there are updates, we'll pass
It
those
has been
along.
great
and-
though to see how much interest there is, and for folks who, can't come here at noon. Whatever, but they could watch it while they're making dinner.
They do.
Yeah.
Because I'll get people telling me, oh, I listened in at one, yeah, in the evening or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank
Now
you.
they'll know all about
Thank you.
procedure.
Grab a sandwich.
Thank you.
Grab a sandwich to go if you want. Anyone didn't get lunch, there's lunch.
This is the part of the meeting where they wait for me to take a bite and ask questions.
Yeah.
I sandwich during the curator's report.
So we are actually going to start the official agenda, but we are in the theater again because we have a program going on in the house in the summer kitchen today. So we are at the Heritage Discovery Center in the theater. So one other thing under procedure bylaw is I just wanted you to think about, and we can make the decision at our next meeting, but we don't have to meet every month. So that came up when Rachel said, oh, you meet every month. So if you feel that take a few months off, we can have, there are certain times of the year that the Historic Site Board should meet. And that's usually spring leading into summer, because as you can see on the bylaws, which are in your binders and in the back of this agenda package, again for you, is there you determine user fees, you determine final submission that I prepare for you on budget, asset management. I talked about. Sometimes we walk around the buildings and make the maintenance list, or to help determine for the city which asset has all of a sudden become to the point where it needs repair before another asset. So those are all things because as you oversee the operations. So we try and do a lot of that by the end of July. Just because when the fall arrives, it's already going to senior management and council. So, but my thoughts are for you to take away, make a decision at the next meeting or not. If you feel, we'll put it on the agenda And then it can be for discussion or change at that time. But, you know, if you want to skip 1 or 2 meetings, maybe do 8 out of 12, that's by all means your decision as the board. Already, I'll always recommend, we don't meet in August. So that's when I take my vacation. Yeah, so that was on here on the agenda, discussion about how many times you meet. Financials are also supposed to be reviewed on a monthly basis, but they're not always available on a monthly basis on the, when I look for the statements. So it can be done even quarterly. You know, it's just that as the bylaw states, the historic site board, we use the financials and the expenditures to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. So that will come up again next meeting. Okay, so election of officers. So we're going to start with the position of chair. According to the bylaws, you are to elect a chair and a vice chair for the actually 23, remaining at 23 and 24. So it's a 2-year term, just like your position on the historic site board. So I need to have someone that resolve that the nominations be open for the position of chair.
I will move that.
The seconder,
I'll second.
that was Heather.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, resolved that the nominations be open for the position of chair.
So then I have to see who is going to nominate someone for position of chair, and I have to repeat it 3 times for nominations. So, sure.
I nominate Kelly Marshall as chair for 23-24.
Seconded.
Kelly, do you let your name stand for chair of the historic site board?
Well, now that I know it's 2 years. But yeah.
And now that you've had your procedure bylaw,
Seconder, happy?
I have Charlotte and Quebec. On the
Okay.
nomination for
Oh, I can
Kelly.
stick with whoever did it last.
Well, it's been here. I've been on all here, like Joe's not here.
Any further nominations for chair? Further nominations, that's the last one for chair. Okay. It's our appointed chair.
You.
I can continue to do a position of vice chair, and then Kelly as the new chair will take over the rest of the agenda. So for the position of vice chair for 2023 and 2024, we're looking for someone to move that nominations be open.
I'll move the nominations be open.
Seconder? Sandra, okay. So nominations are open for the position of vice chair. Someone would like to make a
I
nomination?
nominate Silvana.
But I can't do that yet.
Yeah.
I just realized that I left my mouth.
And I hear Selena, you're accepting the nomination. Is there any further nominations for vice chair? And last time, any further nominations for vice chair? Hey, welcome aboard. Kelly as chair and Silvana as vice chair.
Thank you.
And now, if you don't mind, you get to take over.
Sounds good. Okay, on to item number 4, the declaration of urinary interest. There is any. Seeing none, on to item number 5, adoption of the agenda. I have a mover and seconder from the December meeting.
No, it's agenda. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, wrong one.
That's okay.
Mover and seconder for this agenda.
I'll move this agenda, be accepted.
And all in favor? Thank you. Now the adoption of the minutes, that's where I was before. The adoption of the minutes, I need a mover and seconder from the December meeting.
And it that's to be from someone that was in attendance. Is that true?
And all in favor? Thank you. And on to item number 7, business arising. I think business arising.
Not from December, no.
And on to item number 8, the accounts. I have a. Want to discuss it first, or get discuss it first, and I get it.
What was in the agenda package, it was a year to date, not final. On how the finances for 2022 were looking. The final will be forthcoming with the audited financial statements with the city of Sault Ste. Marie. And that you'll receive the draft first at one of your next meetings, and then you'll also receive it when it is audited. So that usually the final audited financials are June. So they look at that, but so that's another reason why we do financials every so often in the agenda package, so you can determine our fiscal responsibility. And just in review for you, the 2022, we did receive a fair amount of COVID relief. And so that's why you'll see under government grants a larger sum than normal. And we spent it. We did a lot of I don't even know what the word was, retrofitting. We have furnaces now that have HEPA filters. We have taps and toilets that are touchless. All kinds of things like that. Streaming equipment. So lots happened with some of that. Are there any questions? As we move along throughout the year, you'll see it as we review financials, how they sort of work and where things fit.
Brackets are positive or negative? Must be positive.
Well, it depends on the revenue. If it's revenue, it's a positive.
So everything is negative.
So all the revenue comes in brackets, which is opposite what I would do with my personal banking. You know, revenue's the plus and expenses are the negative, but this is working backwards because bottom line on net revenue or expenditure is approved on an annual basis, and we have a targeted budget column, as you can see. That council review and approves that.
Final number of the 315, 467, that's a negative number.
Yes, that is, so the expense to the city of Sault Ste. Marie, and so that was 2021, 315. And that was the budget that the actual year end was in 2021 was 234. And then you can see the left-hand columns were 2022, where we're at so far.
So I have a mover and seconder for the preliminary financial. You, Heather? Seconder? Okay. And all in favor? Thank you. Item number 8. What, window restoration?
Because this discussion and resolution falls under finances, it's under accounts, so it's 8.1. So the historic site board has an agreement that there is fundraising dollars done through the sale of bricks. And it was plaques as well, but they sold out, so the walkway to history, but that is direct money that goes into a historic sites board trust. And then also revenues in the gift shop that are net with expenditures go into the trust. And the same with courses and program. Net goes into the trust. So it builds and builds slowly. And it allows the historic site board then to utilize these funds for purposes of leveraging other funds or needing it for restoration purposes. And anything that you so feel needs attention and money attached to that. So right at this particular point, we are going to do the restoration of the windows, the second story of the old stone house, which is the second batch of windows. Last year we did the main floor. The tender came in a little bit higher than what was approved under asset management. And so the city is asking if the historic sites board would consider up to 12,000. We're looking at a possible of almost 8,000. But when we restore, you never know what we're going to find when we start to take out the framing of the windows and window sills and those kinds of things. So the historic sites board trust, I think, currently is up over the 100,000 mark. So you do have it in the trust account to do the if you so desire, and everyone agreed to release up to 12,000 to finish the window restoration. Completely finished. If you don't agree, it means 3 windows, actually 2 windows will wait. And they are under the front portico right now, but the ones that will be identified as not being repaired. So that's the background on the decision and the resolution. Is there any discussion, question?
So this reservation assets, you know, right?
Yes,
Just get a mover and
maintain the
seconder.
integrity.
And I got a mover and seconder. You. All in favor? All in favor? Thank you. Item number 9. Question.
I just wanted to say I have to step out at quarter after. You know, still need form.
We will lose. We won't lose one. Everyone's here except 4-1, so, yeah. But we most likely will be done.
So on to item number 9, the treasurer's report.
Just right now, I'm working on, next week is March break. You can't believe it already, for those of you that are parents of young folk. So we are involved with the cultural pass, which is 7 locations of the cultural attractions. The 7th this year being, I think, the new SPG building being involved with us. So everyone, you can get a family pass for $40 and you can go to any one of us as many times as you want. And there are certain days have special programs. For each of us that planned. And then April 1st is here on site, we have our egg hunt, so it is for the young children. They go on they do crafts in here, and then they go to the old stone house and look in the rooms, and they're protected and barricaded, and we have lots of volunteers, but they look for the color Easter eggs in the rooms, which they trade for a treat at the end. And an older youth or child does an egg scavenge.
Remind me again how many people attended last year.
Well, it's by registration. Every 15 minutes, we get 25 children. So it's, yeah, it's about, when I did the tally, if we fill every spot, it's about 325 children. Plus, we get the parents, the grandparents. Some of the kids come all dressed up and bring their Easter baskets. It's a big deal. It's great.
Kathy, what were the sales of the passport tickets?
I haven't even checked, and as soon as I started to discuss it, I thought I should have checked to see how many are sold to this date. As of last Friday, not many, but
Closer to the time.
it's, you know, people are last minute, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like me, oh my goodness, it's March break, so. And they can purchase on the spot too, so. If by Monday they don't do anything, then purchase one right then and there, so.
Now, are those like advertisements distributed to the schools as well, so that
It went to the schools,
they would know?
it's in a media release today to the world. And it's been on everybody's social media. So. And we all posted it. So. Speaking of events, just and programming, as you see today, we are in here because we have programming going on. This week, we are doing what normally is our grade 3 program. We're doing it with newcomers to Sault Ste. Marie with interpreters. So every day this week, we have individuals with their English as a second language instructor plus their interpreters coming through and doing a 3-hour program. So they have to make butter and cook on the hearth, and they found it very fascinating. Yesterday's group to do quill and ink and write their name. And what was really interesting to us is that they were writing their name in whatever language they were accustomed to. So we saw Arabic and Chinese, and it was great. So not all newcomers, but a big group are coming this week and being introduced to us. So, yes.
Are you doing a press release to summarize how positive this event was or anything like that? Or
I hadn't even thought that, so it's a good point. We could do something.
Oh, I recommend it too, yeah. That's really cool.
yeah, it really is. Yeah, and it's just welcoming our new Canadians and new.
Very good idea.
That's a great story, actually.
Yeah. A little bit more work for you, Kathy. but-
Yeah. We just keep adding to the list.
And speaking of that, council. One of their, just recently, you know, we said they would support the Ukraine. It's been a year. So the donation box next week will go to local newcomers from Ukraine. And we have ladies that have just arrived that are coming Saturday to help me teach Ukrainian Easter eggs next week. So people can just come by and watch, or there might be a few spots left if someone wants to come and learn. So, yeah,
So which Saturday, not this Saturday, the following Saturday?
yes, 18th. So I'll be instructing one of those things I do on my spare time at this time of year, but they're coming to help, so, yeah. That's exciting. And then, because we are, and we do a lot of events, as you saw in your binders, there's a list of events. We try to do one a month. As a special event. And then but out of that, there are two large events that we do, which is the Teen Feast in partnership with the downtown and Fall Rendezvous in partnership with our friends group. It came to my attention that we can apply for events and events assistance, especially if we're looking at marketing and bringing tourism dollars in, those kinds of things with NOHSC. So I diligently in the last 2 days written the application. The senior staff and within the city will review and approve the application, but as a board, I need to just make you aware. And the reason I asked on the procedure bylaw, if you could pass a resolution, was because of this, but it's not necessary. I mean, you do need to be aware of everything I do on your behalf and on the city's behalf. But, so we are looking at an application to the community events stream under the cultural support program of NOHSC for funding to aid in, especially in promotion and marketing. Some of the expenditures that we have to deal with to bring forth a quality presentation. So it's not just marketing and advertising. There are a few pieces to the puzzle to add quality. You know, like stage rental, lighting and sound for musicians and things. So, but that, just so you know, that is going forward. If you want, you can support it through resolution, or you just need to do it. Under the curator's report. It is in the, we are asking for the top level, which is up to 15,000. It's not huge. So senior management within the city can sign off on that and the application and but yeah.
Do you want to read that first?
Well, I drafted one in case you were interested in. Oh, there's a question beside you.
And I'm going to declare conflict of interest. I work with ministry that NOHSC is under. And at the same time, I'm going to excuse myself, doing actually leaving, not because of this.
Yes. You did tell us you had to leave at 1:15.
I think it's 1:15. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll read the resolution here. Resolved that this Winnipeg Board approve the submission of the application for funding, requesting $15,000 to support the June to October events at the ECNHS. Remember Chair Clerk now.
Yeah.
So I have a mover and seconder for that. You. And seconder? Thank you. Good name. And all in favor. Thank you. And on to item number 10, I was not in attendance last week, so I don't have a report to give you.
I don't think we had one.
Oh, no?
Don't quote me, but
That
I
was
think,
my fault.
no, I think you were, there was more than just you, so, but they may have. Don't quote me.
And on to item number 11, new business. Yep. And item number 12, the next meeting will be.
Actually, or comment, You always do a great report. Can you give us an update on the cruise ships at the next meeting,
Sure,
please?
put that down.
You know, the dates and May Rose Scholars. I'm always curious to see what our numbers are gonna be like.
We are getting, I think we have almost all the listed cruise ships.
I don't know if we can talk about this. This is something on the agenda.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank for the meeting next week, next month. Cruise ship and Rose Scholar.
Are you maintaining that calendar in the break room? Because that's
Yes.
what we go by. Yeah, okay. Trying, if we're having an event, trying to see, it's the same thing,
Oh, super smart.
even if it's just practicing.
Yeah.
I will bring that forward and then it also goes out to at the same time next month to all our readers.
Okay, and can we talk about fundraising, general fundraising next time? How we're doing on that? Yes. Like, are we still selling bricks and all that you're mentioning?
We are. And the spring installation is going in when the snow melts. We did move to a new agreement. Give you a full report next week.
Anything else? No? Our next meeting will be April 12th. At noon. Here, I guess.
Maybe in the summer kitchen.
Sounds good. So, mover and seconder for the adjournment. Thank you. And seconder,
I'll second.
thank you. And all in favor, yes.
And it's what, I have to be out of town for council business on that day, so I just want to let you know I will not be here.
Okay.
This is why I'm-
I will provide a written report with the agenda pack.
With pictures. Or I can wait till the following meeting.
And we did receive official regret from Joe Bumbaco today. I forgot to mention that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Not the YouTube.